Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Tennis Physio Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Melissa Mnitty, a physical therapist and certified personal trainer. And today we will be interviewing Emma Green, also known as the Tennis Elbow Queen. Emma graduated in England as a physiotherapist and added a sports medicine master's degree and is a licensed physical therapist in California. In 2019, Emma started a Facebook group for tennis elbow sufferers, and people started reaching out from all over the world. To fulfill this need, Emma created an online version of her program in 2020 and wrote Tennis Elbow Relief, which was published in 2021, instantly becoming an Amazon #1 bestseller. Emma now works 100% virtually, guiding tennis players and golfers all over the world on their elbow healing journeys and helps other PTs create online businesses and passive income. We're honored to have Emma on the podcast with us today. And just a reminder that this podcast is for educational purposes only and not to be used as individual medical advice. So, Emma, thanks for coming on today.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. It's an honor to be here.
Awesome. So I work with tennis players similar to you, particularly adult tennis players looking to enhance their game while balancing other aspects of life, and getting into some ways to optimize performance on the court. So before we get started on some of the nitty gritty, can you tell us how you started as the tennis elbow queen and where are you now with things?
Yeah, so I was described as the tennis elbow queen a few years ago by somebody, and I kind of went, "Oh, yes, I am claiming that." So that's where the name came from.
I love it.
And yeah, I kind of ran with it, and it definitely described exactly what I do, because my caseload right now is about 80% tennis elbow. And so I see a lot of them. So I kind of like, yeah, that does describe me. I'm gonna claim that.
Yep, absolutely. Did you always plan on working with this population?
Nope, not at all. I always knew I was I was interested in working with sport. So I was a gymnast as a kid, so very sports orientated, was on every team at school, just loved sport. And so it was very much a natural progression. When I was 13, I had a problem with my knees. I ended up in PT. And I remember sitting in the clinic and looking around and going, I could do this. And so from the age of 13, all of the classes that I needed to take, I was heading in that direction. I knew what I wanted to do. So it did make life very easy from that perspective. And in the UK, it's physical therapists who work with sports teams. And it was that natural progression. The lifespan of a gymnast is not very lengthy. You know, at age 20, you're a veteran. And so I kind of transitioned from being 7 days a week in the gym to being 7 days a week at the side of a pitch or the side of the court or working with the athletes, which I absolutely loved. So I traveled the world with sports teams, had amazing experiences, really, really loved it. And then 18 years ago, moved to Southern California with my husband, had a couple of kids. That slowed down my travel. And I was working in the local hospital at the regular outpatient clinic, seeing everybody. And, you know, that was kind of where my life had evolved to. And I happened to be in an office with another physical therapist and a certified hand therapist. And we were all writing our notes. This tells you how long ago it was. We were writing notes
Oh boy.
one evening. And I shared a desk with the hand therapist. And I can remember just seeing out of the corner of my eye, she sat back in her chair and she said, I've got this patient. And you kind of know when somebody starts like that. It's like, oh, I'm going to get a story here. So I put my pen down. I kind of like, okay, what's going on? And she told me about this patient that was coming to see her. And she'd been seeing him for a while. He was a professional drummer, had tennis elbow, had been suffering for 18 months, had been everywhere to try and solve this. Because obviously, as a professional drummer, if you have tennis elbow, you can't play. You can't work. So, and the other thing with musicians is it's not just what they do, it's who they are. And so he had this issue that was stopping him from doing everything he wanted to do. And he had literally been up and down the length and breadth of California. He'd been to different people all over the country to try and solve this issue and had not been able to solve it in 18 months. So he ended up in front of a surgeon and had said, I want surgery on this. And thankfully she said no. She said, I don't know what kind of therapy you've had in the past. I need you to go and see the therapist that I work with. And she'd sent him to my friend.
Mm.
And he was asking her all these kinds of questions. So she's a certified hand therapist, and she's one of the best I've ever worked with. And
Yeah.
she deals with shoulder, elbow, wrist, and hand. And he was saying to her, can my thoracic spine be affecting my elbow? And she was like, this is out of my realms of knowledge right now. What do you
Right.
think? And I said, you know what? Put him on my list. Let me have a
Mm-hmm.
look at it. And I
Yeah.
can remember that first day that we met. I went out to the waiting area. He was standing there leaning against the wall
Yep.
and just looking down, and he looked dejected, demoralized, just depressed,
Yeah.
and I called him in, and I can remember he kind of like heaved himself up off the wall and almost rolled his eyes as I called him in, because I was just the next person that was going to fail him.
Yeah.
That's kind of how he felt at the time. So I really took an interest in him. I love a challenge. I think as PTs we do, right?
Yes,
And so
most certainly.
that's it. And I was like, you know what? I'm not going to fail this guy. I'm
Yeah.
not. I'm going to be the one to fix him.
Yeah.
Let me figure this out. And so I had worked with tennis players in the past. In my previous sporting life, I'd worked with some elite tennis players, but they didn't have tennis elbow. They sprained their ankles and they had hamstring strains and things like that.
Yeah.
And so predominantly when I was working with athletes, I was working with a lot of lower limb stuff. And here was this musician with this upper limb problem. And so I was like, okay, I'm not going to let this defeat me. So I trawled the research at the time. I was like, I really took it upon myself. I spent hours and hours trawling the research to find out what could help this guy. And I found out tons and tons and tons of things that didn't help tennis elbow, but not very many things that did.
Yep.
So going back to my sporting life, I knew I could help people with Achilles tendon problems. I'd done that before.
Yep.
And so I took the principles of how I worked with the Achilles tendon, I applied them to his tennis elbow, and he basically became my guinea pig for trying all of these different things. And so he was right. His thoracic spine was involved. His neck was involved. His scapula, his shoulder, his rotator cuff, all of these things we worked on. Huge neural issues. So we kind of peeled back all of the layers and then came up with a program that did get him better. And I can remember the day that he came in, and he actually, so he wrote the foreword to my book, so he tells his story way better than I do. But he talks about the day when he had gone to make himself a bowl of Captain Crunch cereal and had been able to take the gallon of milk out of the fridge, pour it onto the cereal, put it back in the fridge without realizing he was doing it with his affected arm. And that was just
That's awesome.
life-changing. That was like the moment that he was like, this is working.
Yeah.
That's it. And so, within 6 months, because it took us 6 months because we were figuring a lot of stuff out. Within 6 months, he was back playing the drums as though nothing had happened. So he went back to the surgeon and was like, ta-da! And she called me up. She was like, what did you do with this guy? She said, I really didn't expect him to make a full recovery. And I said, I it's not rocket science. I just took these elements, put them all together, and it worked. So since then, that's now over 13 years ago. Since then, she sent me all of her tennis elbow clients. And so she sends me all of her tennis elbow, all of her golfer's elbow. If there's any biceps, triceps, tendon, anything, any tendon issues around the elbow, I get them. Some of the tendon issues around the wrist, she'll send them. But and word started to spread. So I started to get other doctors, surgeons, therapists calling me up saying, what are you doing? Can we come and watch you? Can we learn? And I was like, it really is not rocket science. It's all in the literature. We just need to apply it.
Right.
And so that's what happened. And he was the first one, and it just went from there.
Yeah, that's an awesome story, Emma. I really love that you shared that. And just remembering as therapists that it's not just the area that we're looking at, right? It's all the structures that connect together, right? Especially, obviously he's a drummer, but even with tennis players, it comes from the spine, right? And that is one of the big bases of how we move, and we're twisting and turning and all these different things. And if we're not addressing that, things can get a little bit tricky. So,
Yeah,
um,
absolutely.
how often when you're treating tennis elbow, do you find that it's coming, with a big portion from the spine versus something that's more maybe local to like the elbow and wrist?
95% of the time.
Yeah.
95% of the tennis elbow clients that I work with have some kind of something going on with the neck.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So in terms of when you're treating tennis elbow, what are some of the tips that you give your clients and things to help minimize the risk, or if they are having it, what are some of the key things you give them?
Yeah, definitely. So to minimize the risk, particularly for, tennis players, any racket sports, it's always build up slowly,
Hmm.
and especially this time of year, it's really tempting to
Oh
suddenly
yeah,
go, summer's here, let's play 7 days a week. And
right.
you've been playing once a week the rest of the year.
Yep,
That definitely is putting you at risk for
for
sure.
sure.
So building yourself up slowly is probably the number one thing that I say to people with regards to prevention.
Yep.
The other thing is stretching,
Mm.
because the main cause of tennis elbow, we always think of it as overuse. And yes, if you go from playing once a week to playing 7 days a week, then you
For
are
sure.
putting yourself at risk. But the overuse part of it leads to an increase in muscle tension. And it's the increase in muscle tension that tugs on the tendon that causes the problem. So
Right.
keeping that muscle tension down is
Mm.
essential. And you can do
Yep.
that by stretching. Stretching does that. So
Yep.
by stretching, particularly after you play, because when
Mm.
you play, you're using those muscles, the muscle tension is going to go up.
Right.
By stretching afterwards, you're bringing that muscle tension down. If you can bring that muscle tension down, it's not going to pull on the tendon. You're not putting that tendon at risk. So stretching, particularly after you play, is super important. And if you start to feel tension within the forearm, getting some heat on it.
Yep.
Heat is such a super simple strategy, but it's so effective. It feels
Yeah.
kind of nice
And it
too.
feels good.
So
Yeah.
that's it. And it can bring that muscle tension down.
For
So
sure.
there's some of the main things that I tell people for prevention.
Yeah.
Now for healing, there's a whole gamut of
Whole
things.
gamut, for sure.
And it's so interesting as you look at the research. It is all in the research, but it's
Hmm.
all piecemeal. And
Right.
a lot of times, patients are looking for, what's the one thing I can do to heal my elbow? What's the
Mm-hmm.
one pill I can take? What's the one shot I can have? What's the
Yeah.
one surgery I can do? What's the one exercise I need to do? And it doesn't work like that. It is multifaceted.
Yep, for
And
sure.
so there are all these different little things that need to be pulled in at a specific time as well.
Yep.
So over the years, I started to realize that there were sort of 4 phases to the treatment program that I was giving people. Phase 1 was very much about calming the symptoms down. And that's where heat would come in.
Yep.
That's where ice would come in, if applicable. But
Right.
also things like starting to calm the nervous system down. Cardio
Mm-hmm.
exercise is really
Right.
important to heal tendons,
Yep.
because tendons have such a poor blood supply. We need to increase that blood supply. A really
Yep.
good way of doing that is cardio exercise.
Absolutely.
So 30 minutes every single day, no days off. It's a
Yep.
rehab technique to help heal the tendon.
Right.
So looking at cardio exercise, if somebody's had symptoms for longer than 3 months, they've now got chronic pain.
Yep.
We now know that chronic pain changes the brain in certain ways. We get
For sure.
biochemical changes in the brain, even anatomical changes in the brain. If we don't reverse those, that tendon's never going to heal.
Yep.
So we have to address those changes. Forest bathing is an incredibly powerful way at rebooting the brain and reversing these chronic pain changes that the brain has.
Yep.
And so I will tell my patients, okay, you got to do 30 minutes of cardio every single day, no days off. Walking counts. So if you want to walk, that's okay, but you need to be outside. You need to be seeing green things. And they'll kind of
I
look at
love
me
that.
like, okay, she's gone really woo-woo here. And if you'd have told me at the beginning of my career that I would be teaching this kind of thing, I
Yep.
would have poo-pooed it. I would have been like, no, that is way
Nope.
too woo-woo for me. But the research is there.
It's
The
true.
research
Yep.
is showing us that things that we have known in the past really feel good and make us feel better. We now know why it works, because the medical research is showing us that.
Yep.
So there's a lot of research coming out of Japan with regards to forest bathing and reversing the the chronic pain changes in the brain. And so we tap into those too. Things like meditation, things like visualization is incredibly powerful for tennis players. And progressive relaxation, bringing that muscle tension down. So these are all phase 1 strategies that can be started immediately to help calm the nervous system down. Because we get an element of, it's called central sensitization. It's a hypersensitivity of the nervous system. And it's incredibly common. Nerve problems and tendon problems go together like peanut butter and jelly.
Oh, yes.
And if we only address the tendon, that nervous system is just going to stay hypersensitized and is just going to keep irritating the tendon. So everything needs to be calmed down. So starting from day 1, many of these strategies work to calm the nervous system down. Then moving into phase 2, which is normalizing the muscle tension. We want to bring that muscle tension down because ultimately we want to get to phase 3, which is strengthening. Now, that's where the magic happens. That's where we put the eccentric load through the tendon, and that's where we start to heal the tendon. However, if your muscle tension's already up and then you start a strengthening exercise that takes your muscle tension even higher, it's just going to hurt. And then you're going to say, oh, I tried that. It made me worse. Well, perhaps you were doing the right exercise, but at the wrong time.
Absolutely.
And often we'll find that too. Getting into phase 3, we don't just focus on strengthening the forearm and the tendon. We work on the core, we work on the deep neck flexors, we work on the lower traps, we work on rotator cuff, we work all the way through the chain, because oftentimes a weak core can be affecting a tennis elbow, or a weak shoulder, weak rotator cuff can be affecting the tennis elbow. So we make sure we address everything. And then ultimately healing the tendon, you got to get heavy with that. I've worked with many people who have rehabbed pretty well, and they've got themselves pain-free around the house doing all the normal stuff, but they just can't quite get back on court. There's something that's stopping them. And I'll say to them, talk me through your rehab, and they'll tell me what they're doing, and they're doing a lot of the right things. And I'll say, how much weight are you using for your eccentrics? 2 or 3 pounds. Well, that's not heavy enough. To play tennis, you need to be 12 pounds plus. And it has to be heavy. And so again, I started to realize there were these sort of phases of strengthening that people are going through. If they're doing between 5 and 8 pounds for their eccentrics, most people are pretty comfortable doing day-to-day activities. But then between 8 and 12 pounds, there's your moderate intensity activities. But for high intensity like tennis, you've got to be 12 pounds plus.
For sure.
I've seen one lady get back to pickleball at 8 pounds, and another lady got back to kayaking at 8 pounds. But they're this end of the bell curve. Most people need to be 12 pounds plus to be doing those high intensity activities. And then phase 4 is building back into those high intensity activities. Increasing endurance, increasing function, getting you back doing everything you want to do with no restrictions. Because, I've heard people in the past say, oh, my tennis elbow is fine because I don't do anything. Well,
that's not really a solution.
Is that really what you want? I mean, you can sit there and do nothing and it feels okay. No, we want you back doing everything you want to do with no restrictions. And that's phase 4. That's the final phase.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, you bring up a lot of really good points. I think, especially in phase 1, we take for granted the power of just being in nature. I wasn't aware of that as a term, forest bathing. I do talk to my patients just about just being outside and doing their aerobic activity. So I love that there is a term for that. So I'm definitely going to be looking into that one. But, I talk to my players all the time. Meditation, mindfulness, it not only calms the system, but also helps with self-regulation, like when they're on the court in between points. So I think there's so many benefits to that calming phase that, can carry over later for sure.
Totally agree.
Yeah. And I like that you bring up the going heavy in phase 4. So many people are afraid to go heavy. I think there's certainly some ideas around, oh, wait, I'm just going to stick to light weights and I'm good. But, thinking about how tennis works and the speeds of the racket and what it's moving and the weight of the racket, you really got to be able to control that over and over and over again throughout a match, right? So I love that you bring up that point. Speaking of the racket, do you talk to players and your clients about their equipment in terms of their rehab?
Yeah, I mean, most of them have a pretty good idea. Many times people will come to me, and when they end up in front of me, they'll say, it was just strung too heavy, or I changed and it was just like, it was slightly too heavy. That they know what it was most of the time.
Right.
But yeah, we kind of do discuss that. And part of the rehab that we do is getting them back to those sports specific movements.
Yep.
And so we use visualization in phase 1. In phase 2, we start doing very slow sport specific movements without the racket. It's almost like Tai Chi. It's like, okay, go through what would it be like to go through a forehand? What's it like to go through a backhand? Go through your serve, go super slow, open palm. And so that you are, again, we're training the body in those movements. We're keeping those neurons strong. And then you can speed up. So then you can go fast into those movements. As long as that feels okay, then we add the racket. So then you're going to hold the racket. You're not hitting anything. You're not doing, but you're going to go super slow. So we go super slow again, and then we go fast. And then we start to add in the impact of the ball. So it's this progression again as the healing is going, because we want normal stresses and strains going through the tissues for normal healing. And normal is having a racket in your hand and doing these movements. So it's important to integrate that too.
Right. And just like you said, also grooves that nervous system, right? Keeps those pathways nice and strong. So multi-factorial there. I love it. In terms of, so we talked about, the 4 phases people should go through. When you're taking people through these phases, what are the areas that you notice, people are most undertrained? Either both golf or tennis.
Yeah, for sure. I think people are quite surprised when we address the core. When we work on deep neck flexors, when we look at the lower traps, scapular stabilizers, rotator cuff. Lots of times people are aware of like, oh yeah, I need a strong rotator cuff because of what I'm doing. But they don't go all the way back to the core. I mean, everybody knows they need a strong core to prevent back pain, but I don't think they put it together with regards to the activities that they're doing.
Yeah.
And if there isn't an element of weakness in the core, it could be that you then have to grip the racket tighter. And that can be part of the problem. So when I start saying, okay, we're now going to do these core exercises, think about your pelvic floor, think about the deep abdominals, and they're kind of like, this is my elbow, that, right? So that oftentimes is part of it. But I'll always say to them as well, the side effects of doing these exercises is good spine health. It's less back pain in the future. It's less neck pain in the future. You're preventing other problems by starting these things now. Right. So always kind of flipping it around and saying, the reason that you've got tennis elbow, so I can start you on all of these things now.
Create a healthy athlete, right? Regardless of the age. I love it. So in terms of your business, right, you said that things really just evolved over time after seeing the drummer, right? What has been some of the biggest joys of working particularly with this population of tennis elbow?
Yeah, I think seeing people like Buddy and, so people who have been elsewhere, they've tried rehab, they haven't got anywhere, and they think that nothing can help them. They've tried everything that they know of, and nothing has helped them. And they think they either have to go and have surgery or they just have to live with it. Maybe this is it for them. And that realization, when you start to get the improvement, I mean, it never gets old for me. I love it every time.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, I'm thinking right now, so I have a tennis player who had suffered for 6 months before he found me, and now he's back playing. And I have a golfer who I had started working with at about the same time. Very, very similar story. 9 months of trying PT and other things beforehand. And both of them are so appreciative. He played 18 holes and they're so appreciative, but they're also still a little cautious. They're like, I can't believe I'm still pain free. I can't believe I can lift those weights. I can't believe I can do, and they can, and they're doing this. And they've done everything I've asked them to do, and so they've got the results. But because it's failed in the past, they still have this little kind of, when am I going to feel it? When am I going to feel it?
Right.
And so I think as well, setting the expectation from the outset. This was one thing that I didn't mention when I was talking through the program. So when I first started teaching this, like 13 years ago, when I first met Buddy, nearly 14 years ago now, we used to think that tendons healed in 12 weeks. That was the medical knowledge at the time. Tendons heal in 12 weeks. And so the program was 12 weeks long. And so as new research comes out, there was a groundbreaking piece of research about 8 years ago, maybe 9 years ago, that came out and said, no, tendons take 12 months to heal. And so it's not just sitting back for 12 months and then it's healed. It's 12 months of doing the right things. And sometimes that can be hard for patients as well, because again, so the golfer who came to see me, he was like, well, I'm 9 months in. I'm like, no, you're not, because you're just starting your eccentrics with me today. This is day one. You've got 12 months from here, because it's 12 months of doing those eccentrics. It's 12 months of doing the right things. So I get them to imagine a chart with 52 little boxes on it. And they have to cross off each of those 52 little boxes whilst they're doing their eccentrics. So often, like the tennis and the golfer, they're both 4 or 5 months in, and they're both pain-free. They're both back doing what they want to do. But they've got to continue doing those eccentrics for another 8 months to ensure that we get full healing of that tendon and resolution of that issue. So I don't know how many times I've said that to them and said that to them and said that to them. And, and it doesn't always go in, because then it's like, well, I'm feeling good now. Can I stop doing the exercises? No. Remember what I said. Look back to your chart. How many boxes have you checked off? You're not even halfway through yet. And so that's a big portion of it as well. Now, I'm very lucky. The surgeon who sends me all over the tennis elbow place, she tells them it's 12 months when she sees them. Yeah. So they come in, they're like, oh, is that really? And so, I explain, yes, it is, but you're not going to be feeling it that length of time, but you do need to do the exercises for that length of time. So it's so much about getting it here as it is getting it here.
Yeah, setting that expectation early on and getting people to really understand time also has to happen, right? You can't just heal it quickly. You bring up a great point in terms of the 12 months. What about after the 12 months? What is, do people continue with these things? Once that healing has actually occurred, what is the process that you have people go through?
Yeah, it's very individual. Some people basically say, I am never stopping these exercises because I'm never going back to how it was, and a lot of people are that, and I like that, and I totally understand that. Some people will wean down. So instead of doing the exercises twice a day, like they have been doing, they might do them once a day. They might do them once every other day. They might do them once a week. Some people stop doing them and never need them again. So it's so individual that that's basically what I tell them. You've got to find what works for you. And most people who play tennis or golf or whatever it is at a high level want to maintain that strength, because they're kind of proud of themselves that they're now doing 12, 15, 20, even 25 pounds for their eccentrics. Like, I'm strong, and they kind of want to maintain that. So
for sure. It's no joke to do 25 pounds of eccentrics with your wrist. That's not light. That's for sure.
That's pretty darn heavy. Yeah.
Yeah. And, in the grand scheme of things, it's not that long of a time period that it takes you to do those exercises, for the long-term benefit. So that's awesome. So yeah, I like that you mentioned it's the 12 months. We don't necessarily always think about that in the research, but tendons do take time to heal. And I think that people really need to get into that. Okay, what is my regular routine that I'm going to do to keep my body nice and healthy so I can stay on the court, right? Or on the golf course, whatever it is for people, right?
Yeah.
So you express some of the joys, right? Being able to give people their confidence, getting back to doing what they love to do. What has been one of the challenges during this journey?
Lockdown was definitely a big challenge. Although having said that, I had started to dabble in telehealth beforehand.
Okay.
And so one of my best friends from the UK, you can probably tell I'm from the UK, this was probably now about 5 years ago. And she had posted on Facebook saying she had tennis elbow. And so I immediately called her up. I was like, do you not know what I do? And she was like, well, of course I know what you do, but I can't exactly pop and see you. You're 5,000 miles away. So I said, you know what, let's jump on Zoom and let's see what's going on. So we jumped on Zoom and I basically talked her through my program. And within 3 months, she was back playing field hockey. And so her doctors in the UK just couldn't believe how fast she'd recovered. And obviously she was super excited. And interestingly, she had so in phase one, heat is a big part of phase one. And I used to say to people 2 or 3 times a day, and you're good. She heated way more than I actually told her to. And she got better faster. And I had another client at about the same time in the US who did the same thing. These are, you know, kind of like the type A personalities. If I'm going to heat, I'm going to heat all flipping time.
I'm going to heat all day. Yep.
And it got them better faster. So I not only do I learn from the research, obviously, which is out there, but I learn from my patients all the time.
For sure.
And so, you know, my patients taught me that, yeah, heat is great, but it's even better if you do it more often. And so I advise my patients to do heat every hour through the day in that initial phase, because we really want to kickstart the healing process. We want to decrease the muscle tension. And that is a fantastic way of doing it. Yeah. So I realized at that point that, hey, this works without me having to put my hands on anybody. This works without me having to be in the same location as somebody. Yep. And then obviously when lockdown happened, because I had my regular clinic, people would come and see me in the clinic, we shifted everybody to virtual overnight. And so because I'd already done some telehealth, I was comfortable with that. The shift was actually really easy. And so when I was looking at my outcomes from when I was seeing people in the clinic, and I was looking at my outcomes from seeing people virtually, they were the same.
That's awesome.
And I was like, I can stay like this. So I'm 100% virtual. I haven't not gone back into the clinic, and I won't go back into the clinic.
Yeah. I mean, you learned you can do it, and you can help so many more people, right? Telehealth versus being in person, right? So the impact is huge. So I love that. It was a blessing in disguise, right?
Yeah, it certainly was. And so I have to tell you, at the beginning of 2020, I wrote my goals for the year. And one of my goals was to do more telehealth. Okay. And another of my goals was to spend more time with my kids. And my kids came home from school on March the 13th, 2020, and didn't go back for 17 months. So I got both of my wishes that year.
Who knew? Early in January.
Sorry, it was.
It's all your fault, Emma. Oh my goodness, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. So, you know, you've given us some really good advice on how people can kind of start working through tennis elbow if they are having these issues. How soon do people start seeing relief, you know, as they're going through those different phases?
Yeah, really quickly. And a lot of the times they can't believe it. I have one lady right now who is a very severe case and has surgery scheduled for August. And I keep telling her she won't need it. Like, you won't need it. You won't need it. And she has tried so many things that she doesn't quite believe that it's going to work. Yeah. And it's so nice. I spoke with her last week, and she said, I had no pain at all yesterday. And she hasn't had that for such a long time. Yeah. But then she's still clearing her schedule in August because she doesn't quite believe that she will continue to improve. And I know she will. Yeah. And it's going to be great to get her to that point. For sure. But yeah, it can be very, very fast. I mean, I've had people who've suffered for 5 years, and within 3 weeks, they're pain-free and comfortable. And they, you know, they're kind of like, gosh, I wish I'd known about this sooner. I wish I'd started this sooner. And I'm like, yes, let's just get the word out there, because nobody should be suffering. This is not something that people should be suffering with. There's a way to deal with it. And it's all evidence-based. All the literature is there to back up everything that I teach. And it works. So nobody should be suffering with tennis elbow. You know, when you hear people who've had this for years and years and years and years, and it's unnecessary.
For sure. Yeah. What you're doing, Emma, is great, right? You're really helping people and changing their lives and getting them back to what they're doing. So thank you for all that you do. As we wrap up, what are some 3 pieces of advice that, you know, could be of value to my audience?
Yeah. So certainly for prevention of tennis elbow, build up slowly is going to be my number 1 piece of advice. And I know we talked about that earlier. But, you know, don't go from playing once a week to playing 7 days a week. Go from once a week to twice a week. Then add in a third, then add in a fourth. You know, you can play every day, but just gradually build yourself up to that. You just want to increase the tolerance of the tissues to the things that you're asking it to do. So slowly over time, build yourself up. The second thing would be to stretch, and stretch after you play. You know, stretching is important, and so many of us don't do enough stretching. And we really need to look at, look at our cats and dogs.
Yes.
My dog will get out of bed this morning, and before he comes over to me, he's going to stretch. And nobody's told them to, but they know it's the right thing for their bodies,
Yeah.
and we should do that too. So
Yeah.
certainly stretching after you play is going to be super important. And if you start to feel anything, deal with niggles sooner rather than later. Because coming to see a professional, whoever it may be, it's so much easier to deal with something that you've had for 3 weeks rather than 3 months or 3 years.
For sure.
If there's something going on, the sooner you get it checked out, the sooner it will be resolved, and the sooner you'll be back playing everything, doing what you want to do.
Yeah, 100%. That's excellent advice. In terms of other resources that people can, look into if they want to learn more, what would you recommend? Either books, audios, etc.
Yeah, so I definitely recommend Tennis Elbow Relief, Healing Lateral Epicondyl, 7 Solutions for Lateral Epicondylitis. That's my book. You can get that on Amazon globally. Actually, it's also in Barnes and Noble and
nice.
everywhere you can buy books. So you can definitely get the book. There is a link within the book for additional resources. So there are videos that go with the book. Sign up for the book bonuses. You get the videos as well. They're very helpful. You can come into the private Facebook group that I have for people who have bought the books. I go live in there every month answering questions. I also have a free Facebook group as well. And you can find me at my website, Tennis Elbow Queen. I'm on Facebook as Tennis Elbow Queen. I'm on Instagram as Tennis Elbow Queen. Twitter, wherever, you'll find me as Tennis Elbow Queen.
I love it. Well, thank you, Emma, for hopping on with us. It's been great having you and learning, all of the ways that we can help tennis elbow. And again, thank you for coming on.
You are so welcome. I'm actually going to offer your listeners a tennis stretch. So I'll give you that link. It's a bit.ly link. So bit.ly/tennis stretch. I'll give you that link as well, and they can sign up and get the stretch that they need to do after they play.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. And I'll make sure to include that link in the show notes for everyone as well. And thank you again, Emma, for coming on.
You're so welcome.